Wait, is this me? Oh, no, it's not. Okay. Hi, guys. We are gonna start class now. There's not many people because it's Halloween, but if you guys want some chocolate or candy, please take some. And then this week is going to be week 9, which is going to be illustration. And we have a very special guest lecturer here. This is Erin. She's very cool, and she was also my TA when I took the class, so very fun time. Okay, so as an overview of what we're doing in class today, we're going to introduce your final, which don't worry, it's not due for a while, but we're just going to let you guys know. The second part is going to be illustration basics, and then we're going to go over pen tool again, fill in effects, and then we're just going to wrap up at the end. Okay, attendance for people enrolled in the class.
The word is One Piece.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Okay, and then if you guys want the slide deck, also the link. Okay, so going over the final, what it'll look like, and then like how the next few weeks are going to look for you. Okay, so for the final, we want you guys to create your own final project proposal. Our goal for this final and for the class is for you to discover something that you're interested in making. So this is like a lot more open-ended than your midterm is going to be. And then, yeah, we want you guys to propose a project and then see it all the way through for the next few weeks. So we want our only rules is basically we want you to use at least 2 of these skills. You're going to pick from auto layout, prototyping, variants, and illustration. So your proposals are going to be due next Tuesday. I believe it's midnight instead of before class. But they must include your project idea and description, your 2 selected skill concentrations, and your midpoint check-in goal. So you can also have more than 2 skill concentrations if you want. It's up to you, but it's like minimum 2. And then we will also give you feedback on those proposals by the Thursday that week. Yes. And then we will also have a midpoint check-in just to make sure you guys are like starting to work on it, so you don't feel really rushed at the end. And that will be due the week after that on Tuesday, November 14th at 11:59 p.m. Yeah, you're just going to submit your Figma file on B courses. And this is like a way for us to give you more feedback on your process, especially because I don't think we're going to have like lab critique for that. So yeah, please turn it in so we can give you guys feedback. Okay, and then for your final submission, it's going to be a PDF with your Figma file linked onto it. And then you should have your entire design process on your Figma file, not just like your final project or final product, sorry. But with that being said, if you could like clearly highlight what part is your actual final product, that would be really nice. Maybe like a different page for the whole final product. And we're gonna release like a form for if you guys want to present, which is going to be like a quick presentation of your actual project at the final lecture, which is going to be lecture 12, which is going to be the week after Thanksgiving. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then there's also going to be a brief write-up just to describe like your process and like how you came to your final product. And yeah, it's going to be due. The whole project is going to be due Monday, November 27th at 11:59, and that's going to be the week after Thanksgiving break, right before lecture 12. So we have time to like put them all in the file. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that? Everything's also going to be posted. I think it's already posted on B courses. Okay, cool. All right, now it's Erin time.
You have so much. Okay, so basically today we're just going over illustration. And so I know you guys learned like earlier in the semester like how to use the pen tool, how to like create simple vector illustrations, but we're kind of going to go into like more detail with that and show you like exactly everything you can do in Figma. So first of all, we want to show you some illustrations made in Figma. So these are vector illustrations, and just as a reminder, vectors are made with the pen tool. So those are like shapes that you can zoom into like over and over again instead of like becoming pixelated like normal art on Procreate. So I think this is what most people think of when they think of vector art, like a lot of geometric shapes. But you can also do things that are slightly more detailed, like just a simple icon can be repeated over and over again to make an illustration. And going even more detailed, you have this like retro look with all these different calculators. You can see these like incorporate some more shading, some more like stylistic features. And then even more detailed, this is created just using gradients and simple shapes. So you can see the sun in the background is like a perfect circle, but there's like a little chunk taken out on the bottom. That's just like using a gradient. So you can also add dimension by using gradients. The next one is even more realistic. I would call this like semi-realistic. It's a briefcase, and you can see like at the top here, this was probably created using a linear gradient, and then probably another linear gradient for the black here, and then probably a mask layer to keep that all within the shape of the briefcase. And then here's some illustrations from Pixar's Soul. So even though this looks like computer generated modeling, this is actually vector illustration in Figma. And if you actually go to the illustration page linked, you can see like every single layer of the gradients that was like built up upon each other in order to make this illustration. So I highly recommend you do that. Yeah, the next one is Monument Valley. So Monument Valley, like someone created a level design kit in Figma just using isometric vector illustration. Another one is realistic portraits. Again, this is probably all gradient and layer blur, like just layered on top of each other over and over again until you create this effect with vector. Okay, now we're going to talk about more details about illustration overall. So what is illustration? So illustration is really any image, any visual image you create to showcase a concept or an idea. So that could be a book cover, an anatomical drawing, or a scientific diagram or a Renaissance painting. Yeah. And again, vector illustration is illustrations created with vectors, which are lines, points, and curves that maintain their structure no matter how much you zoom in through. So throughout like all computational models, like a vector will be preserved. And a lot of people think of vector illustration as these like geometric shapes, but it can also be something more rendered and shaded, like this one on the left. These are all examples of vector illustration. So today we're going to be examining perspective, color, and composition. So when you're creating your illustrations potentially for your final project, just keep these things in the back of your mind. It'll save you some time and allow you to create like beautiful illustrations really simply using these principles. So first of all, perspective. Perspective is a way of rendering three-dimensional objects in two-dimensional space. And this may seem simple because you'll think like, oh, any cube, anything I draw on paper is in perspective, but there's actually like a lot of different ways of rendering perspective. Yeah, so the first one is one-point perspective. So this is where you just draw one point on your page, and then you draw lines emanating out from it. And those lines correspond to faces in 3 dimensions. So you can see that these 2 lines are the edge of the cube, and this line is the bottom edge of the cube. So yeah, one-point perspective is like very geometric, like very zoomed out. And here's another example of one-point perspective. You can like start rendering multiple objects. And these are some examples of one-point perspective. So you can pretty much see the vanishing point in this one because these 2 on the bottom right, these 2 lines clearly converge behind these people. And sometimes the vanishing point is hidden, like in this bedroom. But basically, this is just showing that all these objects are rendered in 3-dimensional space using perspective. And second is isometric perspective. So this is where you'll create like an isometric grid and then draw on top of it. And I think this is more clearly shown in video games. So for these like amusement park builder video games, it's always rendered in isometric perspective because you can move things forward and back on the screen without them getting bigger or smaller. So if something is farther away, it's actually the same size as if it was up close. So that's how you can like build these levels like on a flat screen infinitely. I actually didn't know that before taking this class, so I think that's pretty cool. I didn't realize the objects were like the same shape. So if you want to do a video game, isometric perspective. Next one is atmospheric perspective. So this is basically just as you move farther back, you reduce the clarity, make things darker, and make things smaller. So you can see as this rectangle moves back, the properties decrease. So these are some examples in fine art. You can see that on this bottom left, the mountain in the back is like blue versus the mountain in the front is red. So you reduce the temperature of the color. So yeah, basically just changing the color and clarity of things as you move towards and away from the screen. So next is just 2D flat art. So this is just an example of something that can be in UI UX design, for example, like all your buttons, all your icons are just two-dimensional flat art. We also saw some examples earlier of just patterns or like a grid of characters. Like imagine Christmas wrapping paper is just all two-dimensional. So you don't necessarily have to have like complex perspective to create an illustration. So again, these are not exhaustive. You should experiment with what you need to convey and don't be afraid to trust your own judgment. So if you're drawing and like all the lines are not lining up to that one perspective, just forget about it and like use the judgment of what you think is right. Yeah. So next we're going to talk about color. So we learned earlier in the semester that there are different connotations associated with each color, like, oh, yellow is more energetic and blue is more like professional, but where this is going to be how we can like apply that to illustrations. So first of all, how do we use color in design? So the main ways we use color are to attract attention, evoke emotion and meaning, and organize similar elements to create an aesthetic. So the most common model of color that you've probably seen before is the color wheel. But when you're picking out illustration colors, this is actually pretty useful because you can pick colors that are either close to each other on the wheel or far away from each other to create contrast. Yeah. So yeah, just another recap of these, especially if you guys are interested in UI UX design, product design, brand design, just like take a quick screenshot of this and make sure you're able to talk about like, oh, I chose blue because I want our brand to be really professional because we're handling people's money. This stuff actually is like scientifically proven, so it's really useful if you're able to use this in your illustrations. Yeah, so just quickly again, hue, saturation, and value. So hue is where the color is on the color wheel. Saturation is how intense the color is, and value is how light or dark. So how much black or how much white is added into that. Okay, again, hue on the color wheel. And yeah, now we're just introducing in the Figma interface. You can see that saturation is by moving across the wheel. Value is moving up and down. And hue is adjusting this bar on the bottom. Yeah. Yeah, so now some technicalities about color. So whenever you're expressing color in Figma or whenever you're designing anything, you want to keep track of the HSV, the RGB, and the hex code. So you'll be able to see that right here on the bottom. You'll be able to get the hex code of the color. And this is like a mathematical computation of the color. So you can tell like exactly what color it is across different platforms. Yeah, it's important to note also that CMYK is the version you convert to if you're going to print. So that's just mixing the colors with cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, I believe. And it's just for a print. So this is not particularly useful for Figma, but something to keep in mind. Yeah, so now creating color palettes. Now that we know the aspects of colors, we can see how these color palettes apply them. So you'll notice that, for example, these two are different values, but I would say these are kind of all similar saturations. They're like slightly muted in the top middle. And on the right, these are all pretty high saturation. Yeah, high saturation, but different values. So you'll see by mixing those color properties, you can create like color palettes for your illustrations. The next is temperature. So different colors have like warm or cool associations with them, which is like more yellow or more blue. So for example, the rectangle on top, the square on top is the warm tone, and the square on bottom is the cool tone, even though these are both like brownish black and these are just pale white. You'll note, like I think you can still see it on the screen, that the bottom one looks slightly more blue. Yeah, so it's important to mix warm and cool tones, even if you don't notice. Yep, so also just color schemes that you can keep in mind for creating a color palette. And here's an example of that. So yeah, as you're looking through coolers, keep in mind that like this is complementary because they're on opposite ends of the color wheel. Split complementary, triadic, and analogous, which is all next to each other on the color wheel. Yeah, so principles to keep in mind are variety and unity. So having one property consistent, but the other properties different is generally a good policy. And context. So basically both of these are actually the same purple shade, but this one I think looks more blue because it's on a warmer background, and this one looks more pinkish because it's on a blue background. So yeah, keep in mind color context. That's like very important for accessibility. Yeah, so light also affects color, as you can see by shining different lights on these objects, like different colors are reflected. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about color or perspective? Guys, okay. Next we're going to talk about composition, which is how the pieces are laid out in an illustration. So first of all is the rule of thirds. Like you may notice when you open your iPhone camera, you can see this like grid. And this is because your eyes are naturally drawn to the intersections resulting at the thirds. So you'll see like an intersection here, an intersection here. Yeah, and you want to like position the main objects in these intersections. So here you can see that this gear of the clock is positioned at the rule of thirds. And here, this is also like somewhat close to the rule of thirds. So you can like kind of break the rule when you see fit. But yeah, generally your eyes are drawn to the intersections. Here's another example, how these two people are right in the center of this top third. Here's another example. Yeah, the face is directly at the intersection of the rule of thirds. Next is triangles. So you can organize objects in like simple shapes like triangles, rectangles, and circles in order to kind of lead the eye and draw in the focus. So here you can see the Mona Lisa is in a triangle shape, and there's this kind of weird triangle composition created by these dogs pointing upwards. And in Parasite, the face and the peach create a triangle to kind of show like symmetry and perfection. Here in the Harry Potter books, they use triangles in the shapes to kind of create empty space for the title of the book, which I think is really creative. Okay, now movement. So a lot of times, like your illustrations can be like stagnant. Like, for example, if you just have a drawing of a house, that's a pretty static illustration. And you can create movement by maybe adding like some clouds in the background, some like, swirly shapes. Yeah, so this is just some examples of famous art. So this wave, the Great Wave, has a lot of movement because you can see like the current of the wave. You can feel that it's going to crash over. And next one is this piece from before. You can see the people are moving towards the camera and the perspective is receding back. So it creates that sense of like linear progression. A dancer and negative space. So if you'll see, like if you look at this one way, it looks just like an illustration of a fire, but you can see that this is actually like two lips kind of almost touching each other, like one lip is here, one lip is here, and that's just created by the negative space of the fire. So note that you can use like not just the presence, like how you organize, having elements is important, like how you organize the elements is also important, because the negative space can like tell an entire story as well. Yep, so it's like negative space in the background, and this is an example of a triangle composition as well. Yeah. And I think this is a really good example of negative space from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. You can see that there's all this complexity in the buildings. Like you can see every window lit up, but then surrounding it, the sky, there's like no clouds in the sky, no stars. It's just completely blue. So if we break this down into a composition, we can see it's created by a simple triangle with this negative space here and here. So yeah, I think it's like pretty satisfying to break down illustrations into just like simple shapes, because you can see how these like complex compositions are created just by like simple design principles. Yeah, so now we're going to go into some examples of combining both color and composition. So an easy way to do this that's like also entertaining is through film studies. So if you just take any shot from a film, you can see how it's like artfully designed. So we picked out the main colors in each film, which is in each shot, which is this red and green associated with these two characters. And you can break it down and see that these compositions can just be condensed into red and green shapes. So if you look at that again, like for example, the motorcycle is this red triangle and the background is this green hue. So yeah, just by condensing, you can see how color and composition play a role. Yeah, and another example is using similar color palettes throughout illustrations. So you can see that this blue, red, and green color are used like consistently, but in different amounts all throughout these illustrations. For example, this one has a green background, a red door here, and then blue doors. This one has a red background, green like wavelength, and then blue surrounding objects. So, and keeping that color consistency helps create like a sense of unity across the movie. So you can keep that in mind for if you're creating like a video game, brand design, an app, just having this color consistency like really makes a difference. Yeah. Any questions?
Yay. Thank you, Erin. All right, so now we're going to talk about how these principles we talked about apply in Figma. So we're going to revisit our good friend, the pen tool. So as we learned in week 4, you can make vectors and vector networks and eventually illustrations with pen tool. And then just as a reminder, you can access it through the fountain pen icon or with the shortcut P. So as soon as you click into pen tool, you will go into vector edit mode, which is where you can place, which starts with like you placing a node, making a line, and then you can go from there. If you want to exit pen tool, then you can just hit escape, hit enter if you want to finish it, or even just click done in the toolbar up top. All right, these curves. So the main difference between making straight lines and curves is that these curves have handles. So if you see super closely where the node is, you'll see these like handles, kind of like a seesaw looking thing extending from it. And these basically let you adjust your curves manually. Yeah, and it's basically a trial and error process. Even now, even though I've used pen tool a lot in my own work, sometimes I don't get it right the first time. So it's really helpful to have like such flexibility when controlling these. All right, so when you select a vector, this panel will show in the right toolbar instead of adjusting like the properties of the components and other stuff on your canvas. Here it displays the X and Y position, and this drop-down controls the handle settings. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but a cool thing you can do in Figma that's relatively recent is that
if you have one vector network, it will share the same fill properties. So as long as your vector networks are closed, as in like there's no gaps within your nodes, you can actually use like a paint bucket feature and fill in entire like sections at once. And you can see in the GIF here how it makes it really fast to just color the illustrations you're going to make. But if you want vectors to have different fills, then you have to make sure that they're in separate vectors and layers. So when you're making, when you're like making your thing with pen tool, make sure you hit like enter escape if you want it to be separate. Otherwise, sometimes it will look like they're apart, but they're actually part of one network if you look on your left panel. So here is just an example of showing how you can fill vectors with multiple colors. I think this is also a relatively recent update. But yeah, you can use the eyedropper tool to quickly color it. All right, so now we're gonna go through some tips for custom vectors that we didn't really talk about last time. So first is healing nodes. This is such a lifesaver. If you might have noticed that on straight lines, if you hover over any part of the line, there might be a phantom node that appears in the middle, just like at the midpoint of any line you have. And you might accidentally click on this and make nodes, but basically you might end up with more nodes than you originally planned to. But if you press and hold shift and hit delete, then you can delete nodes. So you're probably like, okay, what does that mean? Basically, if you make a vector network or illustration and it becomes really bumpy looking, it probably means that you have too many nodes. So by hitting shift and delete, it will delete the node and then make it look smoother. Sometimes it does wonky stuff though, like it'll really distort your thing, so you can just undo at that point. A caveat to that is that if you delete a node, you'll also delete the handles that come with it. You won't just see handles floating around. But yeah, this GIF is just showing what would happen. Another way to introduce curves is using the bend tool. So let's say you want to use curves, but you're not super comfortable making the curves in Figma. You can actually just use pen tool, make the straight lines. And if you hit Control or Command while you're in vector edit mode, it'll actually bend the line for you. Yeah, so you'll see here that once you make the line, if you hit Control Command, it'll like bend it. Okay, so this is what I was talking about earlier. So here you can see that there's a bunch of wobbly lines in this illustration, which is the result of too many nodes. So what you would do is basically go to wherever you want to smooth out. So let's say like the smile here, it's most like wobbly here. So I would just like delete those nodes and it'll smooth it, make it more smooth. Yeah, so on the left side, you have 53 visible nodes, but once you clean that up, you'll reduce it down to 34 and you'll see it looks much cleaner. Okay, fill and effects, some more fun stuff in Figma. So Erin mentioned this at the very beginning, but you can, if you're not going for that traditional 2D vector look you might think of, you can use gradients to add some spice and dimension to your design. So in simple terms, a gradient's a transition between two or more colors, and it's also often a transition of opacity. So if you just make your solid color into a gradient, you'll see that it goes from this very saturated red color all the way to this transparent color. You can also replace it with different colors. So maybe I want it to be red going into an orange or purple or something, or you can keep the same, or you can also like adjust these nodes depending on how much you want your gradient to vary. And you can also apply gradients to both fills and strokes, so not limited to just this. So here's an example of a linear gradient where it basically follows one straight line. So all gradients can have these additional colors. Here, someone's making a rainbow gradient. And and you can adjust the points either on here or on the bar. You can also do radial. This looks kind of goofy, but you can actually do a bunch of cool stuff with it. But the default will look something like this top left one. You can also do angular, which is like, it's kind of like linear, but it goes in a circle. And the colors will go in the order you indicate. So here they're doing just a standard rainbow, but if you want to break this order, you can also like move the points past. Yeah. And then we have diamond gradients. They're kind of similar to radial, but it's more in a diamond or like the square shape. It's really cool for making like sparkle shapes, and I'm sure there's more use cases if you play around with it. And then finally, you can set gradients as color styles. So if you're working on maybe like a brand design, or maybe like if you're doing your restaurant project for the midterm and you wanted to use the same gradient without making it manually every time, you can also set it in your color styles, which is really handy. Okay, moving on to effects. So effects on Figma is on the right panel underneath stroke. By default, it won't have anything here, but you can add stuff. But Figma has exactly 4 effects. There's drop shadow, which is like the shadow in the background. There's inner shadow, which you can see on the top and left-hand sides. There's layer blur and background blur. So let's dig deeper into what's going on here. So here's drop shadow. This is probably the most commonly used effect. Drop shadow creates the shadow behind the shape. The default is this somewhat harsh looking thing. It doesn't look too natural, and personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but luckily you can adjust the blur, which is like how blurry it is, and the spread, which is how contained your drop shadow is. And you can also adjust the hue. So if you want it to be like blue or match a certain aesthetic instead of this gray, you can also adjust that. Typically when I use drop shadows, if I don't want it to be harsh, I'll make the blur like 10, 15, 50, just something big, and I might reduce the opacity down to like 5 or 10%. But ultimately it's up to you, and you can adjust it with these factors here. Inner shadow is pretty much the same concept. It's just a different location, but it will create the shadow in the object almost as if you press down on it. So layer blur does exactly what you think it does. It just blurs the selected layer. So it kind of looks like this person can't read or like forgot their glasses or something. But yeah, the only thing it has to it is the blur. And then here is background blur. So background blur is pretty similar in that you just adjust how blurry it is, but it'll affect the layers underneath it. So in like UI UX design, a common example is if you have a pop-up coming onto your phone, sometimes the background, even though it's not a new page, the background of what you're just looking at will become blurry. Okay, blend modes. So you might have noticed that there's a section called layer when you hit pass through. So here you can change the setting to 2 different blend modes and make a color interact with the layers below it. So oftentimes these are used to finish off an illustration, add some spice and jazz to your design before you're actually finished. So more in the later part of your design process. So here is pass through 100%. So all these examples will use this purple layer. Here is 40%. So it's like between 0, where it's like totally clear, and 100, which is this. This is what 40% would look like. Here's an overlay that's 40%. This overlay brings a little more life to the colors. So you can see it's slightly more saturated and colorful on the right-hand side versus the left, where the colors are a bit more muted. there's multiply. So this multiply darkens a lot because the layer itself is quite dark. And you can see most notably with the white, it becomes sort of this purplish gray color. Here's color burn. I personally haven't really used this before, but you can see how drastically the design changes. It looks like it's just getting darker overall and also a bit more saturated. Like this orange becomes pretty bright. All right, I'll hand it off to Claire for the demo.
Okay. There's like several different demos for this lecture. But we basically showed you like a preview of it in the lecture just before this. So this is gonna be the first one. If we click, there's two popsicles here. Can anyone tell me which one has more nodes? Yes. Yes. Yeah, so you can see these are both created with the pen tool, but because the left one is so much more wobbly, it's because there's so many nodes placed, so there's like so many intersections where the curve is changing. Yeah, okay. So if we go on the clean one, oh my god, can I use your laptop? Okay, if I click into the hair shape on this clean side, you see there's like only nodes where it's really necessary for this shape, only place like where the line actually changes the curve. But if we go over to this wobbly section on the same hair section of this illustration, you can see there's a lot more nodes placed at places where you don't necessarily need to change the curvature of the line. So yeah, there's like several here on the hair, and like especially here is like not necessary. So if you want to edit this and make it less wobbly, does anyone remember the shortcut to delete the node instead of just pressing backspace, because that deletes the whole thing? Okay, that's okay too. So if you click the node and then you press shift and then backspace, it deletes the node itself, but not like the whole line where the two section is. So this makes it so this section is a little bit, is it Command Z on your laptop? I think so. Okay. Yeah, so if you like toggle what I just did, like it makes just this section a little bit more smoother, just to see like if you want to smooth out this rough illustration to make it more like this smoother transition. Yeah. Oh, I can also demo if you just press this node and you just click backspace, it deletes the entire thing, because then this shape is no longer closed and then it just becomes like a broken vector network. Yeah, so if you want to delete just one node, remember to press shift. Okay. All right. Okay, the second thing we're going to do is show you a little bit more about how you can layer like different effects to create these like more complex illustrations in Figma. So if we go ahead and look at this watermelon slice right here and see how many things that go into it, this is where it's especially helpful to name and organize your layers, especially if you're doing illustrations where there's like several different sections and several different effects and like a lot of things going on. It's really helpful later on if you want to go back and edit it, or even like rearrange how it looks if you know exactly what things are. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. So this watermelon slice you see is like separated by the seeds, this side panel, the front panel, the white part, the other white part, and then like the green section, and then finally like the rind. So because there's like so many different sections, or like there's so many different appearances on this one illustration, it's helpful to separate out like individually where you want to break down each like color choice ingredient that you put. So specifically for this red front, you see there's like this linear gradient that they applied to it, and if you open it up like me, you can see how many different shades of pink that they put on it to make it look like a little more complex and more lifelike. Yeah, we can go ahead and like move these around too, and you can see like how it changes. It might be kind of subtle on the projector, but you can see like the red is stopping at different places when I move this around. Yeah. We can also add more by just like clicking on the thing, and then it adds a different square, and then you can add a whole new red shade if you want. Okay, yeah. Okay, and then if we go ahead and let's close this. Okay, and then if we go ahead and look at this illustration of Ace, which is very cute. Very like, what is that called? Animal Crossing? Yeah, very cute. Yeah, it's also sectioned off very well. You can see, like, once again, very good layer organization and naming. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into just one section. So for example, this is just his long sleeve / Chesterfield. What is Chesterfield? Probably like the pattern name. Yeah, there's like several things that go into the just one layer. Once again, if we click into it, we can see there's like several different colors stored in this one thing. Oh, there's also a drop shadow in this, which is helpful. Okay, so this it might be kind of hard to see on it. Let me see if I zoom in. Okay, yeah. If we zoom in really closely, we see like there's a shadow effect right here on his jacket to make it like more three-dimensional. And then this they did by applying a drop shadow. So like we went over in class previously, if you go down to the right panel bar and then go all the way down to effects, which is going to be down here, it's already applied. But if it's not applied yet, you can press this little plus button and then it'll default drop shadow. But if we go ahead and look at the settings for this one, it looks like it has the default settings. I guess maybe they just applied it. But yeah, but if we want to go ahead and change it, you can see it moves the drop shadow around. So I'm gonna make it like more drastic so you guys can see what it looks like. So if we go ahead and like move that, and then let's make this like, if we do like 100, that'd be funny. Oh, okay. Yeah, and then we can move this and make it like a little harsher. So if we apply all these effects, you can see you can play around with like what the drop shadow looks like individually on this one piece. Okay. Yeah. Did you make this or am I confused? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so this is made by Erin. It's very beautiful. Yeah, once again, great layer organization. But yeah, there's like several. If we go into, let's see the layers, we can see this is a vector. So I'm assuming you used pen tool to make this shape. Yes, beautiful. Yeah. Oh, she used a radial effect. So if, like, once again, there's several different functions of the gradient. So this one is a different example. The previous ones you saw in the watermelon one were linear, but this one is radial because it's a more circular pumpkin shape. So it makes sense in this case. So I guess like pick the effect that you want that makes sense for your illustration. Okay. Do you want to say anything about your illustration?
Yeah, I feel like my layer organization isn't as good, like beyond the big group.
Okay.
I just layered a bunch of things on top of each other. But yeah, it was one tip is like instead of if you want like a blur effect, but the shadow isn't like a perfect circle or a perfect line for a gradient, you should just make like the shape of the shadow you want and then put layer blur on it and then like max, like put it really high. So like you can use layer blur to create shadows too. I think a lot of people don't really know if you use some layer blur.
Yay. Okay. Amazing. All right. Okay, so the last section is going to be your blend modes. Once again, there's a lot of different ones. So if you guys want to play around on your own illustration to find the one that's right for you, yeah, that would be good. Okay, so with this one in particular, okay, let's see. We can see, wait, am I done? Is under a layer where it says pass through. Oh, I'm stupid. Okay, yes. Okay, so right now it's set at pass. Okay, if we click normal, this like, okay, let's just do the first one first. If you remember what we just talked about in lecture, the pass through is like how clear the thing is. So if I change this to 100, this whole rectangle is just going to look like the normal rectangle. But if you want to make it more like an overlay on top of the graphic underneath it, we can change it back to 40% and we can see how much lighter it gets. So this is a good way to like quickly adjust with like a fast overlay on your thing. Yeah, and then there's like other functions that are, if you used Illustrator before, I think they're similar to that. So yeah, there's like a lot of them, but we're just gonna demo. Let's do like darken, and then I'm gonna change the color, or let's make it a little darker. Okay, yeah. So you could see like more clearly what the things do if you make the opacity higher, just so it's like visibly different. But you could adjust it lower to what you want it to actually look like. But if you just want to quickly test out like the effects, I'd recommend making it like a higher third. Yes. Yeah, so this one is just going to yeah, it's gonna do what it says. It's gonna darken the screen. Yeah, if we do multiply, it's like this other effect that we kept in class. It's really drastic. Oh, maybe if I turn down the thing, it will look less dramatic. But yeah, basically these are all just like good ways to quickly change the appearance of your design. Maybe if you just want a specific subsection to look different. Yes. Okay, like this one, it makes the white stand out a lot more. So if you want like more contrast in your design, this would be a good option. Yeah, okay, yeah, there's all these other ones. Oh, that one's really fun. But yeah, I would recommend playing around to see like which one is correct for you. Okay, so wrapping up our announcements for this week. The secret word is One Piece. Yay. All right. Our announcements are, okay, so your homework in your lab are actually technically going to be the same thing this week. It's going to be a variant-based interactive file in your lab groups. And then you're going to basically brainstorm and set up the file together during your lab. So make sure you go to lab so you can do your homework. But if not, please let your TA know so they can also help you. Yeah, so for homework, you're going to illustrate components and then turn that in as both your lab and your homework. And yes, once again, the final proposals are open, are going to be due next Tuesday, 11:59. Please submit it so we can give you guys feedback, and you can start working on your actual product. And yeah, there's actually not going to be class next week, so you guys can work on your final. Yeah, and then after that, I believe is it Thanksgiving after that? Oh, not yet.
We have a week of class.
Okay, yeah, and then we have 1 week of class after that, and then it's Thanksgiving. But yeah, good luck on your finals, and we will have office hours as normal from 10 to 11. So if you have any questions, or you can also ask your TA. But yes, thank you for coming. Happy Halloween, guys.